Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso and we'll be looking at another discourse from the Buddha's teachings. This one's from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 10, sutta number 61. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the discourse and give some explanation, and then I'll take any questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So as mentioned, this is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 10, sutta number 61. This is called the Avijja Sutta. So it's a discourse about ignorance, avijja. And the Buddha begins, he says, Mendicants, it is said that no first point of ignorance is evident, before which there was no ignorance, and afterwards it came to be. And yet, it is evident that there is a specific condition for ignorance. So this is the opening remark of the sutta. So this is a very important point that the Buddha is making. So he's, in a few places in the suttas, the Buddha brings up the concept that there is no discernible starting point or beginning point to the cycle of existence, the cycle of experience. That no matter how far back you look in time, there's always something before that. And that every phenomenon has a preceding cause. You can never find the first thing which had no preceding cause. And yet, there's a very clear cause and effect sequence that's constantly operating. So we can't necessarily find the first cause, but we can always find the preceding cause. And we can therefore look at our current conditions and see what are the causes that we're making now, which will then affect what happens next. So this concept in Buddhism that time extends back effectively infinitely into the past, that there's no starting point that can be found, is a very important concept in Buddhism. So it's referring, once again, it's relating to our experience of reality as an unbroken sequence of cause and effect. And again, the important thing is actually to focus on the present moment and to see what causes and conditions are we generating in the present moment. And how can we create the causes and conditions for wisdom rather than for ignorance? So here he's saying there's a specific condition for ignorance. So ignorance doesn't just happen randomly, but rather there's a specific condition that makes it come into being. So then he says, I say that ignorance is fueled by something, it is not unfueled. So the word that's being translated here as fuel is ahara. The word ahara more literally means intake. And in other translations it's often translated as nutriment. So ahara is what feeds something. It's what gives strength and vitality to something. And he says, so what is the fuel for ignorance? So what is it that feeds ignorance? What is it that makes ignorance strong and makes it persist? And the Buddha says, the 5 hindrances. So the 5 hindrances, for those who don't know, the 5 hindrances are interest in sensuality as the first one, aversion is the second one, dullness is the third one, mental dullness, so this blurry, hazy state of mind. Agitation is the fourth one, and skepticism is the fifth. So the more we engage in these 5 hindrances, then the stronger our ignorance becomes, the stronger our delusion becomes. And so then the Buddha says the 5 hindrances are fueled by something, they are not without fuel. So what is the fuel for the 5 hindrances? And the answer is the 3 kinds of misconduct. So the three kinds of misconduct are misconduct by body, misconduct by speech, and misconduct by mind. So misconduct by body is things like killing living beings, telling lies, engaging in sexual misconduct. Misbehavior by speech is things like telling lies, engaging in divisive gossip, malicious gossip, engaging in harsh and cruel speech, and engaging in useless chatter. And misconduct by mind is mental activities which are based on greed, hatred, and delusion. So cultivating these qualities of greed, hatred, and delusion through mental activity. So these three kinds of misconduct through body, speech, and mind, then makes our hindrances stronger. And when our hindrances are stronger, then our ignorance becomes stronger. Our delusion becomes stronger. And then the Buddha says the three kinds of misconduct are fueled. And what is their fuel? And he says their fuel is lack of sense restraint. So sense restraint is, again, one of these critically important aspects of Buddhist practice. Sense restraint means that whenever we're having any kind of sensory experience, we want to be careful that we don't fixate on those characteristics and details of the experience which will inflame our defilements. So, for example, if you see something that you really like and you really want, and you keep focusing on something that you really like and really want, then that will tend to make your desire stronger. Or if there's something, there's some detail which is unpleasant, displeasing, something which you hate and dislike, and you focus on how much you dislike and hate that aspect of your experience, then that will make your aversion stronger. So the more you focus on things you like and focus on things you hate, the more your desire and aversion become built up, the more likely you are to engage in the three kinds of misconduct, and the stronger your hindrances become. And all of that feeds our delusion. So what is the fuel for being unrestrained with one's senses, for lack of sense restraint? And the answer is a lack of mindfulness and awareness. So in Pali, this is sati and sampajanya. So sati is commonly translated as mindfulness, and sampajanya is translated here as situational awareness, which is not bad. Sampajanya is a bit of a difficult word to translate directly. Sampajanya means it's commonly translated in older books as clear comprehension. So it has this sense of not just being aware of the experience, but of understanding it, of having some understanding of what's going on. So having a thorough and complete understanding of the experience. So it's a more knowing form of awareness. So sati is more in the category of bare attention, so just feeling exactly what's happening. Sampajanya is comprehending what's happening. And in the text, these usually come together. So sati and sampajanya together have a sense of a thorough, complete, and lucid mindfulness, a thorough, complete, and lucid awareness. So when one is not thoroughly, completely, lucidly mindful and aware, then that makes it more difficult to restrain our senses. We have to be clearly aware of our sensory experiences in order to practice restraint, in order to prevent the tendencies towards desire and aversion. So without strong mindfulness and clear awareness, then it's very difficult to practice sense restraint. So then he says, what is the fuel for lack of mindfulness and situational awareness? So what is it that leads to us not having good mindfulness in the first place? And he says it's not doing yoniso manasikara. So yoniso manasikara means application of the mind based on an understanding of causality. So it's translated here as irrational application of mind, which is okay, but irrational needs to be understood that the Pali term yoniso literally means based upon sources, based upon origination, based upon causality. So yoniso manasikara means applying one's mind based upon causality, based on an understanding of cause and effect, or applying one's mind to an understanding of causality. So based upon an understanding of the cause-effect relationship in the world, then we apply the mind appropriately. We apply the mind in a way that creates beneficial causes and does not create harmful causes. So when we're not applying our mind based on the principles of causality, then that means we don't understand the importance of things like mindfulness, of sense restraint. We don't understand the importance of good conduct and of restraining the hindrances and so on. So why do we constantly look at the world in terms of causality? Well, actually the Buddha says we do so because of faith. So here he's saying the fuel for not applying the mind correctly, not applying the mind based on causality, is a lack of faith. So when we don't have faith in the Dhamma, when we don't have faith in causality, then we won't try to see the world in terms of causality. So one of the critical underlying premises in the Buddha's teachings is the premise of causality, that everything has a cause. Nothing happens randomly or chaotically. So understanding causes allows us to control the effects. So if we don't have faith in the Dhamma, then we won't bother to apply our mind to understanding causality. One first needs to have faith in causality, in the Dhamma principles of causality, before one can apply our mind accordingly. And so then the Buddha says, what is the fuel for lack of faith? And it is not listening to the true Dhamma, not listening to the good Dhamma. So when we don't listen to the good Dhamma, when we don't make an effort to learn the true teachings of the Buddha, then we're not going to have any faith arising. So in order to cultivate faith in the Dhamma, we first need to hear the Dhamma. We need to learn the Dhamma. Then faith can arise. And so what is the fuel for not listening to the Dhamma? And the Buddha says, it's not associating with good people. So if you don't associate with good people, then you can't learn the Dhamma from them. It's quite simple. So, and then the Buddha summarizes, he says, this is the fuel for ignorance. This is how ignorance becomes full. And the Buddha gives a simile. He says, it's like when it rains heavily on a mountaintop and the water flows downhill to fill the hollows, crevices, and creeks. As they become full, they fill up the pools, which fill up the lakes, which fill up the streams, which fill up the rivers, which fill up the ocean. So this is how the ocean becomes full. He says, in the same way, when the factor of not associating with good people is fulfilled, then it fulfills the factor of not hearing the good Dhamma. And when that's fulfilled, it leads to lack of faith, which leads to not applying the mind to causality, to not having mindfulness, not having sense restraint, which leads to engaging in the three kinds of misconduct, which feeds the five hindrances, which then produces ignorance, produces delusion. So then the Buddha gives the positive correlate of this. So the Buddha says, he says, I say that knowledge and freedom are fueled by something. They are not without fuel. And what is the fuel for knowledge and freedom? So knowledge and freedom here is vijja vimutti, which is a term that refers to full awakening, to enlightenment. So it's vijja in the sense that there's a clear knowledge, a clear understanding of the nature of reality. And it's vimutti, liberation, in the sense that one is freed from all mental corruption and all suffering. So knowledge and liberation. Knowledge of the true nature of reality and liberation from all suffering and corruption. So what is the fuel for knowledge and freedom? It is the 7 factors of awakening. So the 7 factors of awakening are mindfulness, Dhamma analysis, energy or resolve, piti, euphoria or joy, passaddhi, tranquility, samadhi, concentration, and upekkha, equanimity. So those 7 factors of awakening are what leads to awakening, to knowledge and liberation. And what's the fuel for the 7 factors of awakening? The Buddha says the 4 kinds of mindfulness practice, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 satipatthana, which are mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of mind objects. So what's the fuel for the 4 kinds of mindfulness practice? And he replies, the 3 kinds of good conduct. So good conduct with body, speech, and mind. So not harming sentient beings, not stealing, not abusing sexuality, not telling lies or using abusive or malicious or useless speech, and trying to avoid impure mental conduct. So mental conduct based on greed, hatred, and delusion. We try to remove that from our practice as well. So when we practice good conduct, then it's much easier to cultivate mindfulness, to practice the 4 kinds of mindfulness. And what's the fuel for the 3 kinds of good conduct? It is sense restraint, as previously explained. What's the fuel for sense restraint? That's mindfulness and complete awareness. What's the fuel for that? It's applying the mind to causality, based on causality. What's the basis for that? The basis is faith. So when one has faith in the Dhamma, then one applies one's mind to clearly understanding it, to seeing it in one's experience. What's the fuel for faith? It's listening to the true Dhamma, listening to the good teachings of the Buddha. And what's the necessary condition to hear the true Dhamma? It's associating with good people. So this is the basic necessary condition. It all starts with associating with good people and not with bad people. When we associate with good people, then we have the opportunity to learn the true Dhamma, the good Dhamma. And that then leads to faith, and so on. So the Buddha says when the factor of associating with true people, with good people is fulfilled, it fulfills the factor of hearing the true Dhamma, hearing the good Dhamma, which then leads to faith, which then leads to applying the mind based on causality, which then leads to mindfulness and complete awareness, which then leads to sense restraint, which then leads to the 3 kinds of good conduct, which then supports the practice of satipatthana, the 4 domains of mindfulness, which then supports the cultivation of the 7 factors of awakening, which then leads to knowledge and liberation, to full awakening, to complete enlightenment. And again, he gives the same metaphor of rain falling on the mountaintop, and the water flows down to fill the hollows, crevices, and creeks, which fills up the pools, the lakes, the streams, the rivers, and finally the ocean. So in the same way, starting from associating with good people, then that leads to hearing the true Dhamma, which then leads to faith, which then leads to causal application of mind, which then leads to mindfulness and complete awareness, to sense restraint, good conduct, the 4 kinds of mindfulness practice, the 7 awakening factors, and finally to knowledge and liberation. So that's the end of the sutta. So at this time, we'll respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions about this discourse. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Richard, Maria, Amaranta, Jayanta, Mano, Rebecca, Gregory, Bhumika, and Indra. Good to see all of you. And there's a question here from Indra, but it's not relevant to this particular sutta. So Indra, I'd recommend you bring that question to Monk Chat this evening. That's your opportunity to ask any questions on topics related to Buddhism. But I don't see any questions on this particular sutta, so I think we can go ahead and conclude at this time. And we'll see all of you this evening for our weekly Monk Chat.